Well, well, well. Look who's back, once again. The #1 rated champion hater on the internet is back to talk more about what he detests. Why, you may ask? Well, a lot of stuff has happened since my first champion rant, and sometimes it's just fun to talk about certain topics, and well, I just like to talk about these guys sometimes. So let's do it again. And like I said last time, this is my opinion. You can share your point of view in the comments. I love reading them. And by the way, a massive thank you to everyone who decided to click on my first champion rant. I honestly didn't think it would get this many views. I mean, it's not like it's a 1 million subscriber milestone or anything like that, so me celebrating the fact that it has a couple of hundred of views maybe be a little bit of a ridiculous thing to do, but I genuinely adore the fact that this video has as many views as it has. So yeah, massive thank you to everyone once again for clicking on it and watching it. But now, let's jump into today's video. So I've enjoyed the 30th anniversary quite a bit, and one day it hit me. I wanted to look back at some stuff I said back in my original champion rant and see if my views have changed or are different nowadays. Back then, I mentioned that if we were ever going to get a master tier difficulty dungeon, there most likely will be champions in it. And I bet they're gonna shove all the champions they can into the master tier dungeons if ever. Now, the first ever master difficulty dungeon is here, and just like I feared, it has champions in it. I mean, who could have seen that one really? It's not like you find them practically in every activity at this point. They appear in Hero, Legend, Master, Grandmaster Strikes, and Battleground playlist, during Vex Offensive, Raids, Expunge missions, Contact Public events, Legendary and Master Law Sectors, Seraph Bunker, Seraph Tower events, Moon Patrol, Override, Shattered Realms, Astral Alignment, Dares of Eternity, Nightmare Hunts, Empire Hunts, Sundial Activity, Interference missions, and now even in dungeons. Wow. Just wow. Here's hoping I'm wrong about them being in Gambit and story missions in the future. But then again, which Queen's expansion is gonna be having a higher difficulty setting that you can choose from while doing the campaign? So, yeah, I'm calling it now. In the Witch Queen campaign on legendary difficulty, there will be champions appearing in story missions. Anywho, the dungeon is here, I played it, and the champs behave just like you'd expect. Like other crap! Thankfully, there is only one champion per encounter. In the Ogre part, for instance, there's Barrier Knights. Fallen Shield has Overload Captains, and Captain Avarok comes packaged with Barrier Servitors. But as you can most likely tell, I despise the fact that they are in this. Dungeons are already a pretty challenging activity for many out there, like the new awesome Sparrow part. That thing on master difficulty is insane sometimes with how easily you get destroyed from the ads. But that is an actual challenge. Despite being 2-tapped by every single drag on a Sparrow, even if you are using Noah's on time, that's supposed to reduce the amount of enemies shooting at you. But adding champions to master dungeons is just so unnecessary. They serve no other purpose than to handicap the player's loadout. But I guess this is just a tease for what's in the making for the future. Just gonna be dungeons in the future with only champions in them as the only enemy type. It is a real shame that these guys have to be in literally every activity, and especially in dungeons now. But at least they aren't in the normal version of the dungeon. But if we are gonna get more master versions of dungeons, including the older dungeons being reworked and brought up to master difficulty, which I highly doubt, but if we are, can you make it so Prophecy can drop Trials of the Nine armor ornaments? And maybe make them a different color palette and call them something different so they aren't the same as the original ones from the Trials of the Nine? That would be an exciting reward and a good reason to do a Prophecy of Master difficulty then. I don't know about you, right? But I don't want to sit through a harder activity with these champs getting more stupid and aggressive and get something from said activity that barely feels worth it. I can't believe I'm saying this, even if it makes sense. But Grandmasters are actually worth doing. they absolutely feel more worth doing than a master tier dungeon. Especially now, with how they made adept weapons have a 100% chance of dropping. Sure, I don't like doing every Grandmaster, but at least the reward tends to be worth doing, even if it is the Proving Ground or the Hollow Lair. I just want to quickly say, fixing Lake of Shadows was pretty uncalled for. I usually think that it is a good thing when Bungie fixes stuff, and I tend to say better late than never. Like with raids. If there is an exploit that allows you to skip or downright ignore a mechanic, that should be fixed. Otherwise, to me, it ruins the raid itself, which is why I still feel like Riven should be fixed at this point. And when they fixed the Pit of Heresy orb duplication cheese, I was all on board with it. Yes, the totem part is now harder, but it is now like it was meant to be. A thing that shouldn't be a thing though, in the case of Pit of Heresy, is when the ogres remain after the previous encounter, and they pretty much make the totem encounter pretty much impossible to complete. This change to Lake of Shadows though, I feel like it was really unnecessary. Yes, Lake of Shadows was very easy compared to the rest of the GMs, but in this case, this was a much easier GM that new players could enter and get their first experience from. But now, new people are getting their ass kicked much harder. These activities to me are just utter BS in their designs, and that's why I have an issue with them making said activity harder. Just like I addressed in my Grandmaster Talk video, Bungie has sort of hinted that they don't like the fact of how easy Lake of Shadows is. But why? What's so wrong with something being the easiest or easier than the rest? This is the equivalent of making Ether Worlds, if it was still around, only be available on Master difficulty all of a sudden. And this isn't the same case like when Crota's End was so laughably easy it was, and still is to some, considered a strike. When they fixed it in Age of Triumph, the only thing I recall they fixed was the bridge part and made it so Crota was more challenging, which was the reason this raid could be so easily soloed. And heck, some people still managed to solo it despite them fixing it. If you don't remember or never knew about this, basically, you could skip an entire mechanic by grabbing a hive sword and swing across the unfinished bridge and just wait for the ants to spawn, kill them, and then you're on to the next encounter. And with Crota, he was a joke. You could simply shoot down his shield with one Galahorn shot, and then start to swing the sword on him until he stood up, did nothing, shoot him down again, and then you killed him. But with Age of Triumph, they made it so not only did you have to bring a sword over the bridge and kill a select few amount of gatekeepers in order to progress this encounter and actually use the bridge mechanic, but they also made it so Crota in this case would summon his Oversoul with each damage phase. When compared to previously, the Oversoul was only ever in play when a person died. But like I said, people were on board with this, and I believe it's because it is a raid, and it's meant to be fun, fair, challenging, but also work as intended. Compared to a Grandmaster, which is like saying if you were doing the Super Expert mode on Mario Maker, and every single level was just from trolls who made the worst and most brutally unfair levels. And then you find that one level that is much easier but still really hard to complete, and you can't believe how good it felt to complete it. Just because something is easier or faster to complete than the rest does not make it a bad thing, especially when it's something as challenging as a Grandmaster. The only fix in this that I didn't mind was the Blight change, because that's at least a mechanic, and mechanics should always be working as intended. The downside now is the fact that more champions will be spawning and you have to fight more of them. But with how they buffed the boss's health, even though I'm still pretty sure you can still melt him pretty fast, makes that one encounter much worse. With how little to no hiding place there is, coupled with the onslaught of aggressive enemies, the boss's ability to teleport towards you, tether you, one-shot you with pretty much every single attack except for his gun, and with how the arena shrinks itself based on how low the boss health is. This was pretty much uncalled for me. They could have just never had Grask have such a long intro animation, or be more like Ignovum with how his animation starts off by being immune. And, just like Riven, this Grandmaster has been untouched for so long. The only reason that it got changed is due to the increased amount of players this season taking on that Grandmaster. So does this mean that you're actually gonna fix Riven in the near future and actually make people do that encounter legit for once? Or you're not going to do that because you're too afraid to increase her health, or just to make her take no damage when she crawls into the different rooms? Or is it because she is too irrelevant? Or you just don't care? It's just so weird. Just as weird as it was to make the hollowed layer into a Grandmaster, if now it's only gonna be a thing for a single season. Although, the season of the lost is very long, so I don't know. Too long didn't listen. Raid and mechanics should be fixed and work as intended. Grandmasters doesn't need to be made harder, or worse. Let me get back on track. We also received 2 new champions sadly, Unstoppable Abominations and Overload Chieftains. This was sort of hinted at in the Season of the Chosen when Presage Master Difficulty went live, and it claimed that there were champions in it. And I am so glad that I managed to do that before these 2 came out. Unstoppable Abomination never stops shooting their arc blast and moves quickly towards you when spotted and can't be staggered by anything. They look great and they would make sense lore-wise, and to be honest, I'm actually kind of fine with these guys. They can be rough, but overall, I tolerate them more than something like an Unstoppable Ogre. At least with these guys, you can dodge their shots if you hang on to a rhythm like with Wyverns. Meanwhile, Ogres spam you down with their never-ending beam of void energy. Then we have the Overload Chieftain, who are sometimes borderline more annoying and spammy than Overload Captains and Minotaurs, and that's not great at all. Just like Overloads, they need to be stunned, otherwise they constantly regenerate their health, and these guys are so unbelievably god-awful to fight many times, due to the fact that they tend to cast out their canisters that either burn, suck you in, or shield every other Scorn. And when they use the Scorn Mine Launcher, they hit peak BS on that hate scale. God, just thinking about them is enough to give you a headache. But hey, they at least would fit the lore, and they also looked pretty rad. So that's something. Looking back at...
I'm quite aware that I'm...
Wait. Albertos?
Indeed, it is I, the legend himself.
What are you doing here unannounced?
I was feeling quite chuffed today. That was until a certain little old bird, rather than eating me, whispered in my ear that you had started these cheeky bants again, and I didn't want to be late for my play.
I didn't really sign you up to be in this video, actually.
Nonsense, young lad. I already polished my shell, trimmed my fabulous moustache, and fixed up a delicious cuppa for this very moment. And now you dare to inform yours truly that this play is not going to happen? This is certainly one of the most gutted moments of my entire life.
No. It's all fine, don't worry. There's nothing wrong with you being here. I just wasn't anticipating your arrival. Forgive me. Of course you get to use your magnificent voice and bless us with your presence.
Ah, now that's precisely what I wanted to hear.
Make yourself ready. I'm actually quite curious to see what you're gonna say this time.
Yes, I'm quite aware that I'm a nasty, quick-producing and fast little bastard. But by the oldest of Josh and Goshes, you all are making us look so insignificant. You spread your horrendous faster than we can grade people's cabinets. You're more nightmare-inducing than the fact that we can live without our heads for a whole week. And this sour taste you're leaving all of us with is nastier than the chemical traces we leave in our own stool. Not to mention, we can survive radiation levels higher than any person ever could. Some of you, on the other hand, could take on seemingly any nuclear disaster imaginable. Goodness me, you gentlemen are awful in just every way and remove everything that we stood for. Had I not been the only one of my kind to speak and been so outlandishly handsome, very important that's made clear, I guarantee you that more of my patriots would have joined me today and expressed our distaste for your existence. We all wish you would stop this bickering and never return. Come back once you've learnt some manners, dear boy, and not being such horrendous cunts, as you are. Marvelous.
Thank you, Albertosh. Really good work there.
No worries, but you'd better promise to hand me that paycheck once you're done mocking these pesky plebeians.
Wait, I mean, yes, I will. I'll gladly pay you for wasting your talent on such an inferior piece of work compared to where you usually work. Don't worry about it.
Very, very good.
So that just happened. Anyway, seeing how we have 4 of each category of champions right now, let's quickly do an original idea that I came up with. The official Destiny 2 champion tier list. No one has ever done this before, and no one has ever thought about this before, so I shall be the first and the true and only judge on these guys. So here we go, here's the official champion ranking tier list that I will be the official judge for, and I will be the only correct one to judge these guys. No one else is gonna be able to say that these should be in any other ranking whatsoever. I, of course, will be the only true one to speak for these guys. For the purpose of ranking these champs, I decided to change it up a little bit in terms of what each ranking tier means. So we got T for tolerable, AT for almost tolerable, BT for barely tolerable, RB for really bad, GA for god awful, and AB can be either absolutely baffling or absolute bullcrap. So let us start with the first champion in this ranking, the Unstoppable Ogre. Now, like I've mentioned, I am pretty fine overall with these guys, seeing how they feel more like what an actual champion should be, right? But I still don't like them. It's just more about the fact that I can sort of stand whenever I see them. The only times that I feel like they are generally god-awful is when you find them in a Grandmaster Nightfall, because their blasts tend to be a guaranteed one-shot. Not really the blast in of itself, but rather because it has the afterburn effect on them as well. Overall, I feel like the Unstoppable Incendiors aren't actually too bad, really. So I would probably rank them at, if anything, almost tolerable, because they are on the very brink of being an actual fine champion, but with how much they scale up sometimes, they can be a little annoying and tedious to deal with, especially on higher difficulty. But they're still fine as they are. Next we have the Barrier Servitors. Now these guys are absolutely horrible. The fact that their shielding, like I said, can go through solid objects and shield so many combatants? Whoever thought that their ability should be that? Like, did you take inspiration from the devil when you created these guys? The only benefit with these guys that I can give them is that their damage output is really low unless there's like a void modifier. Like, I don't think I've actually ever been killed by one of these guys. But they just have a really annoying ability that shouldn't be exactly like it is. I'll be fine if they were shielding as many combatants as they can, and from the range they can, like, I'm fine with that, but the whole idea of it going through solid ground or walls and stuff like that, no sir, that is where I draw the absolute line. In terms of how I would see these champions, I think they should go in the barely tolerable section. Solely because of the fact that they are a little bit, dare I say, balanced compared to many other champs on how their ability is scaled with their actual own attacks. Moving swiftly on, we got the Overload Captain. Now these guys are an absolute pain. Like, I don't think I've ever had any sort of enjoyment fighting any of these guys. When they rock their own Lord of Wolves, it is nightmare fuel. Or heck, whenever they are using the Vandal Rifle and they get that insane level of tracking. I guess the only benefit to these overloads, if I must nail it down, is that they can be summoned with the cannon that does like the twirling or swirling kind of projectile. But that's about it. These guys I have little to no respect for. But I don't consider them to be the absolute worst. Because they are still a overload. They don't break their own character slash category, I guess you could say. We're coming up to those guys very soon. But these guys are absolutely god-awful, that's for sure. And that's why the overload captains, to me, will be sitting in the GA tier. Now we have the Unstoppable Ogre. These guys have also kind of praised a little bit for being more like the Incendior, where you don't always get one-shotted by them on normal or a little bit easier difficulty tiers. They can be just fine to deal with, even though they are still unstoppable and will not stagger from anything. I wouldn't be surprised if these are the actual tankiest of all the champions, because sometimes it really does feel like it. I don't like the idea of them having a one-shot ability whatsoever with their shield blast, or in a other example that I will showcase right now. Now that is pretty hilarious, and I don't mind when that happens. That one is just kind of so over the top and silly that I am fine with that thing happening. But I don't have as much of a liking for these guys compared to the Incendior, that's for sure. I feel like I'm gonna put them where the Barrier Servitor is. And with how bad so many other champions are, I feel like these guys shouldn't be classified as one of the absolute worst. I really don't feel like it. They are far worse and more annoying things. The Overload Hobgoblin, for instance. Now this guy is absolutely an annoying prick. The fact that these guys have not only one of the most ridiculous tracking abilities I've ever seen a single enemy have, like so much so that I would probably even say that I have an easier time dodging an Overload Captain sometimes. Absolutely ridiculous. The only benefit to these freaks is the fact that they are stationary most of the time, so they don't tend to move or teleport whatsoever. The annoying factor comes from the fact that while they are more of a stationary target, when those Seekers come out to play, and how rapidly they can spam fire them, yeah, that's where it starts to sting, and that's where it really starts to get on my nerves. And it doesn't help also that overall when it comes to Overload, they have an annoying tendency to not being able to give a crap about their own mechanic. Because they will just outright heal away even though you are doing everything correctly. I used to think that stasis was a pretty good way to deal with champions, and it sometimes is. Like for many champions it absolutely is working really well. But as soon as it came to Overload, that's when you start to realize how bad these guys really are. Anyway, these Overload Hobgoblins are definitely really annoying. Had it not been for their overall aesthetic, which again, most of these champions looks absolutely great, but I feel like that is not a saving point whatsoever. Like, you can't just have something be very flashy and cool looking, but then work like trash. That's not how it should be. And we're talking about functionality here, and not the overall look. So, would I rank these guys above an Overload Captain? No. I will rank them alongside with a Captain. These two can just stay right here in the god-awful section. I have no love for these two whatsoever. Then we have the Barrier Knights. Now, Barrier Knights can be extremely annoying as well whenever they're rocking the crossbow and they have that annoying fire rate increase. And then they have that stupid shield mechanic that nothing can break unless it's those retarded bullet mechanic. I don't think I have any fun fighting these Barrier Knights to begin with. Like, Knights can already be annoying as they are normally when they get like an arc shield or they spam you down with their Hive Boomer weapon, but these guys take it up a notch. Like, they are really god-awful. They're so aggressively strong. This guy is borderline almost like fighting an Unstoppable sometimes. He is not the absolute worst, but he is going in the god-awful section. They are completely borderline unfair sometimes and just absolutely infuriating to fight. Now this is one of the kind of champions that I generally feel like is intentionally made to piss everyone off. Then over to the next barrier boy. Barrier Hobgoblins. Like I showed in my first champion video. I was cutting through its shield with Lament, and it still regenerated its health, just ignoring its own mechanic. Like, you can't make this stuff up. That's not a functioning enemy at all. I'm sure that there's some other sort of bug within the system that caused this to be the thing, but it should still be fixed. And I didn't even point it out in my first champion rant either, but in one of the scenes where I get killed by one of these guys, you can downright see that the barrier goblin is firing its Minotaur weapon. I forgot what they're called. But you can see that it is actually firing it, but the projectiles are placed so far away, and I have no clue if that is something that happens in every case. But if that's not the case for every other Vex, then these guys are even more broken than they already are. But I don't know if they are as irritating as every time I see the other three down there at the god-awful section. I feel like this will be the first really bad champion. It's really hard to judge this, but if I have to put him somewhere, I will put him in the really bad section. Now to one of the newest champions, the Unstoppable Abomination. And I will downright give them the tolerable section, the first ever tolerable right here. These guys simply feel like you took a Wyvern and gave them essentially a champion mechanic to it. Not that I ever want to see a champion Wyvern whatsoever, but if there ever was a close comparison, the Unstoppable Abomination to me definitely feels like one of those. And yes, while they do hit really, really hard sometimes, and in this case, right now on screen, how you can downright kill them in this last sector and it just seems to ignore the fact that it's killed and teleport back. I am still more fine with these guys. I feel like these are the best equivalent to a champion. You can actually have a fun challenge with these guys. So congratulations, Scorn. When you aren't the most miserable piles of dookie in Gambit, you sure as hell can make a very fun and actually challenging and, in my book, the best champion so far. And now for the borderline broken and absolutely worst 4 champions. And if you know all the champions, you know which ones I'm referring to. Overload Minotaur. The anger that these guys give me, like, I can't even express it. Overload Minotaurs feels like if you took an Unstoppable and gave it teleportation abilities. Think about it. You have something that downright is absurd in its damage output, like these guys. And they charge like really quickly towards you, including the fact that they teleport towards you. As soon as you like just get spotted or you like tickle them with like a small arrow or something, they will literally hunt you down until you're dead. And that is not a hard thing for them to do on like nearly any difficulty whatsoever. Sometimes they can stop the teleportation and instead just run towards you, but their pace at which they are running at is so aggressively fast. The fact that they have their nuclear bomb infused whatever weaponry it's called again to spam you down at any distance at such a ridiculous fast like shot speed. Yeah, no, these guys are absolutely one of the worst creations I have ever seen, and they're going into the absolute god-awful worst tier of this champion tier. I don't even remotely care about them whatsoever. Every time I see one of these guys, I want them to be gone without a doubt. They need to suffer as much as they have made any of us suffer when we're going through any sort of thing that they are included in. Now for the last Unstoppable, the Unstoppable Ogre. These guys are just downright annoying as well. The fact that they are enemy unit that constantly shoot their energy beam and can melt you down in less of a second in many cases. And then you throw in the fact with many of the Unstoppable, they have a one-shot ability. But these guys on the other hand have a one-shot seemingly whenever they are around. Like, I can sometimes survive a tanking Phalanx, Incendior, and absolutely in many cases survive a Unstoppable Abomination, but the Ogres, I don't think I've ever survived a single melee from them. They seem to just be downright saying, I don't care what you're gonna do, where you're finding me, you are dead. I will never ever like to have any Unstoppable Ogres ever. They just cannot be loved. These guys are borderline unfair and not even remotely fun to fight. So yep, you're going in the absolute trash tier of champions. Here's probably the most annoying one on the planet right now. Overload Chieftains. I've yet to see if these guys can actually shield other champions in the Scorn variety. But if they can, they are absolutely ridiculously overpowered. They are downright just annoying. They really, really are, especially with that one weaponry that they have, the grenade launcher of theirs. You're still really annoying, but I will put you in the god-awful tier. You're nowhere near as bad as the next champion, which I feel like is the absolute worst of all the champions. Barrier Colossus. The absolute worst design champion in all of the game currently. They feel absolutely more like you're fighting an unstoppable champion that just happened to have that shield mechanic on it. Why is this more like an unstoppable? Well, whenever you see one of them, you already know what they're gonna do. They're never gonna stop spam firing their weaponry, whether it be the slug thrower launcher like the heir apparent that they can sometimes have, or in this case the almost looking like cold heart weaponry that shoots like those really wide projectiles. I don't know what it's called. That can downright damage you through objects. And the fact that they have a one-shot ground stomp, which is something that should only be the case in Unstoppable's case, because that's one of their gimmicks. These guys have been the most broken champions so far that I have seen. Whenever they break in the worst possible way. Either they pull up their shield far away from them, making it so you have to shoot their shield and not them, or in one of these cases, like you will see right now, this guy did a ground stomp and delivered his shielding in the same animation. Is that overpowered or what? It's one thing when they just put up their shield, but the fact that they can now combine those two things? These guys absolutely go in the absolute bullcrap tier. So, this is my official ranking of the champions in Destiny 2 currently. Do you agree or do you disagree? Feel free to leave a comment below. Let's continue. Looking back at what I said back then about champion dealing weapons, they did actually do something about one of them. Leviathan's Breath. They gave it Archer's Tempo, which I find pretty adorable, I gotta say. I mean, I didn't expect it to get any love in the near future. But here we are, and it's still pretty bad. It's still a waste of an exotic slot for a weapon, whose only uniqueness is that it can deal with unstoppable champions. It ain't gonna get a massive fan base unless you make it into an actual exotic. The reason Devil's Ruin works so much better is that it tries to be unique, and now it even has infinite ammo, making it way better than ever. It is an actual exotic. I personally don't like it and wouldn't use it, but it does overshadow Leviathan's Breath so much. It's just so sad to see it not being able to compete with anything. But on the topic of exotics that can take down champions, I must say, I really love how strong dear old Galahorn is in D2. I feared that it was not gonna be nearly this good when it came back, but oh my god, it is so much fun seeing it rip through everything. Especially during Dares of Eternity with the Star Horse favor buff. The only sad part is that it most likely will be nerfed soon. Probably be an age where it's strong and we can enjoy it. And then comes that twab we all feared and states that Galahorn is getting nerfed. I can feel it. Another amazing tool to destroy these outright annoying fart pickles. Ruined. But that's not all. We also got a new contender for dealing with champions. Arbalest. Nice to see yet another underused exotic getting some love for once. When it isn't shining in PvP, barely anyone thought about using it too much. Maybe some used it for Shiroshi, seeing how strong it was when you broke her shield and got that shield disorient perk to activate. But overall, it was mostly a forgotten exotic. Now, however, it is really good at dealing not only with shielded combatants, like it always was, but it literally one-shots barrier shields. Like, damn! That is definitely making it, in my book, a really cool exotic. Something that absolutely ruins their mechanics. Heck yeah! They also gave it a catalyst, which is pretty much a bump to handling, mag size, and it gives it Genesis as well. It's neat and all, but I'm so happy that they didn't put the barrier portion on the catalyst, but rather made RB just be able to deal with barrier champions from the get-go. But of course, it being me, I do have my complaints with this change. And that is the fact that the only real reason now for why RB is gonna get some love is because of the barrier part. Don't get me wrong though, it is a fun and great weapon, and even better now. But to think that they couldn't do anything else to RB than to giving it champion related stuff is kinda pathetic. Like, was there nothing else you could have done really? An exotic shouldn't have its main gimmick be that it can deal with champions, unless it is an ultra rare exotic that could deal with every single champion. That would never happen unless there's a great downside to using it because of how the decision making at Bungie often are. There must be an extreme penalty for too many cool things. Like the penalty to Tommy's Matchbook compared to Touch of Malice. Or how about the fact that every single shard with light mods on Void Armor has a negative 10 stat penalty. So if they ever decide an exotic that could deal with every champion in the game, I don't know, it would probably be like a Tommy's Matchbook scenario where you take increased damage from all sources and the only benefit is that you can stun every single champion. Make it an exotic trace rifle, call it Tormentor's Curse. Slap on some philosophical speech about how this exotic is an equal plague to those being targeted by it as those who wield it or something, and then there we go, I guess. Or just make Sleeper Simulant tread through every single champion by giving it every single champion bullet. Not like it's meant to be a giant ultra-destructive laser to tear through practically everything, made by none other than the Warmind himself, Rasputin. Yes, I love my Sleeper. I'm not judging you for liking symmetry or malfeasance, so why you judge me on what I love, huh? But like, there's reasons for why many exotics, despite having champion properties, work so well. Lament is fantastic at burst damage, and can heal with every hit. And Divinity is just amazing as it is. I'm glad that RB is more like Divinity's champion power, where it literally takes one single shot to stun their champion, and I do really love the increased damage you get from Shield Disorient. And even in the current season with how Particle Deconstruction works with linear fusion rifles, making it be even stronger. It's really fun to use it against barrier champions. And it also helps you alongside in a Grandmaster or any other activity by having the fact that you can destroy pretty much every shield in a single bullet. But I feel like there could have been a better way to give it love other than the champion stuff. Like for instance, a good buff to Legend of Acris isn't giving it unstoppable bullets. A good buff to it is giving it way more range than any other shotgun. Say the catalyst also included rangefinder and or opening shot. That's a buff, because Acris is super underused and it definitely deserves to be buffed up. I mean, it's a heavy shotgun. Why would people care about Acris having more range than any other shotgun? It's a heavy, you're not gonna see it be used as much as every other weapon. Champion bullets are good as long as they're built into something like, say, Graviton Lance. I think that that gun with its catalyst sometimes is so strong that I never understood how that gun was even remotely legal. But seeing how strong that weapon already is, right, and how it works, it could be given unstoppable bullets without it being its primary utility. Same thing with many other exotics. Lawrence is great and strong enough that it could have champion stuff in it, without it being its main gimmick, or Sunshot, or even Trinity Ghoul. Champion properties should be the cherry on top of the cake and not the entire cake itself. Don't know if you recall, but in the promotion for Beyond Light, they made Lament just sound like it was a sword they can take on barrier champions and nothing more. Like, that's not how an exotic should ever be promoted or sold. I am glad though that it turned out to be way more than that. Same thing with Aphrios Embrace. I mean, superior weighted knife they said in the same trailer, but then all the footage just showed an additional bounce. Glad it wasn't just one more bounce. And I will never forgive Bungie for teasing a season by showcasing next season's champion mods.
But Jolt, why not just use 1-2 police Ferreticam and load for the Southbreaker to delete them, or why not just use only the most broken and overpowered loadouts to deal with these if you hate them so much? Genius.
I feel like that argument speaks for itself on why it's kinda stupid. Listen to it. If there is an enemy that you need to use the strongest of weapons or methods in order to combat them with, what does that say about the enemy then? And besides, I don't want to use Lament or Sleeper or whatever the meta is in the season all the time. These guys should be a unique enemy unit that you can fight against with any means necessary without it always being the OP loadouts. That's not saying that it isn't amazing to see linear fusion rifles with particle deconstruction or grenade launchers with breach and clear shred through seemingly everything, or the Galahorn spam in Dares of Eternity. But sometimes I just want to have fun and use Thunderlord, 7 Sarah Shotgun and the Auto Rifle respectively. But as soon as these guys appear, they have to ruin my day by demanding the champion mods, so I gotta switch my weapons, remove the mod build on my gauntlets or class item, and put in the artifact mods, and only then can these guys be dealt with. And going back to the fact that we have a master difficulty dungeon now, I know how some might be very excited for the master dungeon armors with how they have a separate slot for artifact mods, and I'm very glad that these people are so hyped about them. To me though, I feel like these armor slots are overhyped. Instead of them reducing the cost of the season mods or allowing some to be free to slot in these slots, it is just a slot exclusively made for artifact mods. How is that exciting? Like say on the gauntlets. Imagine if the new slot allowed one of the champion dealing mods to be free instead. That would have been something to be excited for, really. Imagine if the Overload Bow mod or Anti-Barrier Out Rifle mod that only cost 1 energy could be made into a free to be slotted in mod in this slot. Or say Unstoppable Linear and Fusion Rifle mod costed 4 or 5 instead in this slot. I guess the only real benefit is the fact that it does allow you to run free mods at once to deal with champions. These gauntlets do make it possible after all to run Unstoppable Linear and Fusion Rifle mod, Overload Bow, and say Unstoppable Pulse Rifle. Which is good. It is good, but at that point you can barely have any other mod on them whatsoever. So as they are good, but to me they could have been way better, I think. Further on what I said about weapons, I did showcase some examples of weapons that barely could and just flat out couldn't deal with champions. So let's compare the old Sleeper and 7 Sarah Saw footage on the same champion from a legendary Lost Sector. By the way, the Sleeper footage from now is without particle deconstruction, don't worry. As we can see with Sleeper, now it's way better. And it makes me so happy to see. This is much more what I want to see from Sleeper, or heck, any heavy to begin with. A heavy weapon that can actually kill champions, instead of the champions just ignoring all of the work you put in to kill one of them. So this right here, perfect. Now the 7 Sarah Saw, this time with major spec instead of boss spec. Why is that? Well, I have only recently learned that apparently boss spec is not the mod to use for these champs. Major spec is actually the one you should use in combination with Warple weapon. But wait, hold on. The mod that's used for enemies of orange health variety is the mod to be used against a yellow health. Why isn't it boss spec, or why isn't their health bar orange then? How are these guys considered mages when Warple Weapon works on them, but not any other mages then? These guys are already so awful, the last thing you want them to do is to confuse the player on what the best way is to defeat them with. Whoever came up with this decision, like, seriously, was it that hard to make mages and mini-bosses have orange health? Why couldn't mini-bosses and bosses use boss spec? Or how about making champions and mini-bosses have a dark red health or something like that? I like the fact that major spec does work, don't get me wrong, and yes, it is a nitpick, but these small changes could be resolved so easily to keep the game simple for many players who might get confused by this. This game is so inconsistent, it's ridiculous. Anyway, the 7-star test, as we can see, is more like it was before, but now Warple Weapon on heavies are slightly nerfed as well. I feel really bad that these guys have to ruin something that is so much fun to use. I'm personally kinda upset that they don't deal more damage to at least champions. Another thing I've learned since my first champion rant is that I paid more attention to how the overload champions work. From what I gathered, when they get out of their stunned state, they will start to regain health immediately unless they are hit with overload damage. Exclusively overload damage. If they are hit by anything but overload damage, then they regenerate their health, and in the overload taken Hobgoblin's case, it produces its annoying seekers. However, right after I learned this, I find myself fighting some overloads who break that information, and then I'm back to square one. Like, it's funny how we tend to joke about Telesto being the uncontrollable, chaotic love child of Bungie who never listens to them and does whatever it feels like each season. But screw Telesto! Champions are truly the chaotic favorites of a certain individual who just ignores all the rules they were meant to follow in favor of making everyone's day longer and more miserable. I swear, if there ever was an enemy in any game that was made to infuriate people, these are those enemies. Like, even though I don't have an issue with them personally, I can understand how someone would find the red-eyed Lothric Knights in Dark Souls 3 annoying or too brutal to deal with. Especially this guy with his buff maiden. But again, imagine fighting those enemies, but you're forced to use a broken straight sword and had to land 2 charge hits on one of them in order to start to deal any actual damage, and you only had a 2-second time window to deal any damage, and once that's done, they would fully heal unless you started to only use the broken straight sword for around 10 seconds before you can do any real damage again. Oh, and they were always scaled with 10 new game pluses above your current one, and they also use their ultra great sword as a straight sword and cannot be parried. That's how it feels like when you fight champions in D2 many times. But how do I feel about the Marauders in Doom Eternal then? Aren't they just like champions with how they demand you to use a shotgun in order to stagger them? I love Marauders in Doom Eternal. They definitely feel like the right version of a champion, if anything. Nothing is telling you that they demand you to use the shotgun. They just challenge your time to land a shot on them, while Shoddy or the super shotgun is the preferred and easier method to stun them with. You can land a BFG shot on them if you're skilled enough. They fit more in the nature of Doom's world as well. They are fast, aggressive, and they aren't too awful to deal with. I mean, sure, in the DLC land I did struggle sometimes with a single buffed up version, or when you're facing 2 that are buffed along with the Baron of Hell. But still, that feels like a great challenge, even if it is hard. At least it isn't bullcrap. Also, Marauders literally indicate when they can be staggered much better, and they don't waste as much time as D2's champions do with their annoying cooldown system. And of course, they look badass. They're actually a unique and exciting enemy to fight. I have never seen them break their mechanic myself. They don't tend to have a long cooldown, and if they get buffed and turn essentially into a champion version of themselves, it's much easier to deal with it. The only real bad thing about these guys to me is when they summon the dog. It's easy to kill, but the pupper is usually annoying. but still nowhere near as annoying as the champions in D2. I cannot see how you could ever defend these guys with how they're implemented and how they function, when they downright ignore their own mechanic. Despite you following all the steps and doing everything correctly, you're still getting punished for it. I mean, in my first champion rant I showcased some few examples of how broken they are, but just like with this one, there would be a champion rant without me showcasing more.
I still kept it because, again, I do like the... Okay, I did kill the champion, but he literally teleported.
How have these incoherent messes of an enemy type been able to remain for this long in this game without any sort of update to their behavior or functionality? They ruin experimental builds and restrict your loadouts, scale way too high with difficulty tiers, break their own mechanics and can be glitched beyond belief, are placed in nearly every single goddamn activity, some make no sense lore-wise, can't decide if they are majors or ultras, annoying stagger sound, boring gameplay, unfair challenge, and are just the absolute worst enemy design I have ever seen. The only benefit with these is the fact that they make me look forward to everything else we're gonna fight in the future. Like Hive Guardians. As long as those guys don't have a champion version or they force you to fight them with only certain things, I believe that those guys could actually become my new favorite enemy type. Cause like I praised with Wyverns in my first champion rant, these types of enemies make the game more enjoyable to me. The fact that they push and challenge you in a more fun and cooler way is what champions should do. And I hope that is precisely what Hive Guardians will do too. Not forcing us to use only swords or whatever, but just let us go at them with everything we got. I mean, the absolute worst scenario here would be if there is Hive Guardian champions and they have the revive ability from their Hive Ghosts alongside with their stupid and lazily designed mechanic on top of that. Now that would be an absolute PvE killing monster, and they would ruin PvE even more. So if that's the reality we get, better hope they are only in extremely few places. But I must express this once again. I'm not against the idea of champions in D2. I just hate how they behave and are implemented. If you really love these enemies, I shouldn't be the one ruining that for you. That's not my end goal with these videos, as much as they are meant for entertainment, even though I find it really hard to believe that you guys would ever find someone who is sitting and ranting for way too long about something that he already has said before, or just sounding like an overly nitpicking bastard, entertaining whatsoever, and just for sharing my experience with them. You are allowed to love them, and I respect that. I'm personally jealous that I can't enjoy them as much as many of you probably can. One of my favorite things about the first rant video was reading the comment section and seeing the many views you guys were sharing. It's really fun and interesting to me, and I frankly don't care if you're someone who dislikes the fact that I'm yet another loser who don't always use the most overpowered weapons to combat these guys with, or if you fully agree with my viewpoint. I enjoy seeing the different interpretations and opinions, and I also try to relate or understand and see how you guys think about these champions. To some, these guys are the absolute worst, and for others, they are just really good, or can even be great for many. That's how it is. With that said, that has been my second champion rant. Thank you for watching, and to everyone out there, regardless if you love or hate the champions in D2, I hope you all stay safe out there.